Okay, so we're back for another deep dive. And, we always love getting your suggestions. And this time, we're going to be focusing on something a lot of you have been asking about.
It seems like everyone's been really interested in atomic habits lately, especially chapter 3.
Yeah, and for good reason, too. I mean, that chapter is all about how habits actually form, like the nuts and bolts of it all.
Exactly. It's like a behind the scenes look at why we do the things we do. Those actions that become so automatic we barely even think about them. Like, have you ever noticed yourself just scrolling on your phone almost without realizing you even picked it up?
Oh, yeah, all the time. Or like reaching for a snack while watching TV. It's like our brains just go on autopilot sometimes.
Right. And that's exactly what chapter 3 is trying to unpack. It lays out this really interesting 4-step process that explains how these behaviors become so ingrained.
4 steps, huh? So where do we even begin with something like that?
Well, the chapter actually starts by taking us back in time, way back to 1898, to the work of a psychologist named Edward Thorndike.
Thorndike. Wait, wasn't he the guy with the cats in those puzzle boxes?
That's the one. Thorndike was really a pioneer in the study of animal learning. And those puzzle boxes were like his ingenious way of figuring out how learning actually happens.
Okay, so remind me, how do those puzzle boxes work again?
Basically, it was this box, right? And inside, there's a cat,
A
obviously.
cat. Got it.
But the door of the box is locked. And the only way for the cat to open the door is to do some specific action inside the box. Like there might be a lever they had to press, or maybe a loop to pull, or sometimes even a platform to step on.
So it's like a feline escape room.
Kind of,
Yeah.
and the whole point was to see how the cat figured out the trick to escape. And of course, there was always a tasty reward waiting outside.
A little incentive. Right, food, I'm assuming.
Exactly. So Thorndike would put the hungry cat in the box and observe what happened. At first, it was basically just random behavior.
So the cat's not exactly a master strategist right away.
Not at all. They'd be pacing around, trying to squeeze through any little opening they could find, scratching at the walls. It was all pretty chaotic, really, until, purely by chance, they happened to stumble upon the right action.
The magical lever press.
Exactly. The door swings open, and there's the food, just like they were hoping for. Freedom and a snack, not bad.
So, one accidental success. But Thorndike didn't stop there, did he? He wasn't just going to let them get away with it that easily.
Nope. He kept putting them back in the box over and over again, trial after trial. And this is where it gets really fascinating.
What starts to happen? Do they get faster? Like, do they start figuring it out?
That's exactly what he observed. See, initially it would take the cat a really long time to escape. I mean, we're talking minutes.
Really, minutes to just press a lever. I'm starting to feel a little less bad about my own problem-solving skills now.
Right. But then, gradually, with each successful escape, they'd start to make the connection. It wouldn't be this big aha moment, necessarily. More like a slow dawning, I guess. And as they repeated the action and got that reward, the time it took them to escape would just keep dropping.
So we're talking like a few seconds faster, or is this something more dramatic?
Oh, no, it's a huge difference. In the chapter, they actually mention one specific cat, Cat 12. I guess this cat was a bit of a star subject for Thorndike.
Cat 12, okay, go on.
So in Cat 12's first 3 attempts, it took them something like 160 seconds on average to escape. That's almost 3 minutes. But get this, by the final 3 trials, they were getting out in just over 6 seconds.
Whoa, that's a massive improvement. Talk about learning curve. From almost 3 minutes down to just 6 seconds. I guess those kitty treats were pretty motivating. So what did Thorndike conclude from all of this? I mean, what was his big takeaway from these cat shenanigans?
Well, his main conclusion is what we now know as Thorndike's law of effect, which basically says that behaviors followed by good stuff, by satisfying consequences, tend to be repeated. And obviously the opposite is also true. Behaviors with negative consequences, not so much.
Okay, so in a nutshell, we do more of what feels good and less of what feels bad. That's pretty straightforward.
It does, right. But think about the implications. It means we're not always making perfectly rational, calculated decisions. A lot of our actions are driven by this basic drive to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
And that brings us to habits.
Exactly. This is where Thorndike's work really connects to what we're talking about today, because habits, at their core, are just behaviors that we've repeated enough times for them to become automatic.
So all those things we do without even thinking about them.
Like brushing our teeth, making coffee in the morning, checking our phones constantly. Those are all habits, ingrained patterns of behavior. And the early stages of forming a new habit are a lot like what Thorndike observed with his cats. It's all about trial and error, figuring out what works.
So we're all basically just stumbling around like those cats in the box, trying to figure out how to get what we want.
In a way, yeah. When we face a new situation, our brains light up, trying to analyze everything, make sense of it all. We're testing different responses, seeing what brings us closer to our goals or what makes us feel good.
It's like our brains are running these internal simulations, right?
Yeah.
Trying to predict the best course of action.
Exactly. And sometimes we stumble upon a solution that really works. We discover that going for a run helps clear our head, or listening to music makes us feel calmer. It's that aha moment, the realization that we found something that really clicks.
That feeling of like, this works and it feels good, like finding the perfect pair of jeans or something.
Yeah, exactly. And when that happens, our brains take note. They start paying close attention to what we did right before that positive feeling. It's all about connecting the dots.
So it's like a feedback loop. Try something, maybe fail, learn from it, and then try again, hopefully a little bit smarter.
Precisely. And as we repeat the actions that bring us those rewards, those actions become more and more automatic. They become habits.
So we're not just learning, we're actually rewiring our brains in a sense.
Yeah, you could say that. The neural pathways associated with that habit become stronger, more efficient.
And this is where things get interesting, right? Because chapter 3 talks about how as habits become more ingrained, the actual level of brain activity decreases. It's like our brains go on autopilot.
It's like our brain says, okay, we've got this one figured out. No need to overthink it anymore. We learn to recognize the key cues that predict success, and we start filtering out all the unnecessary noise.
Makes sense. It's like driving home from work. You've done it so many times that you barely even have to think about it. You just kind of, go.
Exactly. It becomes second nature. And the chapter actually quotes a behavioral scientist, Jason Priha, who puts it really well. He says, habits are simply reliable solutions to recurring problems in our environment.
So habits are like shortcuts, basically. Our brain's way of streamlining things.
Exactly. They're like pre-programmed responses to familiar situations. And that's incredibly valuable because, let's face it, our conscious minds can only handle so much at once. We have limited bandwidth.
So habits are like freeing up our mental RAM so we can focus on other things.
Exactly. Instead of having to make a conscious decision every single time we encounter a familiar situation, habits allow us to delegate those tasks to our unconscious mind.
It's like those routine tasks that we can just put on autopilot. Things like brushing our teeth or getting dressed. We don't want to have to think about every single step every single morning, do we?
Right. We'd be exhausted before we even left the house. Habits help us conserve our mental energy for the things that really matter.
And that's a really important point because sometimes people worry that having too many habits might make life feel kind of, I don't know, boring or predictable.
That's a common concern, yeah. But Chapter 3 actually argues the opposite. It suggests that habits, rather than limiting our freedom, actually create more of it.
More freedom.
Hmm.
Really? How so?
Well, think about it. People who lack good habits in certain areas, like managing their finances or taking care of their health, they often end up feeling trapped. They're constantly stressed about money or struggling with low energy.
So it's like those bad habits actually limit our choices in the long run.
Exactly. Good habits, on the other hand, create a foundation of stability. They free us from those constant worries and give us more time and energy to pursue things we're truly passionate about.
So it's not about being robotic or living on autopilot. It's about automating the essential stuff so we can focus on what truly matters. I like that perspective.
Right. It's about using habits as tools to create the life we want, not letting them control us.
Okay, so that's a really great overview of the kind of why behind habits. But chapter 3 also dives into the how, right? It breaks down the actual process of habit formation into 4 specific steps. And this is where things get really practical, I think.
Absolutely. These 4 steps are like the blueprint for understanding how any habit works. They're the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward.
Okay, so let's break those down one by one. First up, the cue. What exactly is the cue in this habit loop?
Think of the cue as the trigger. It's the thing that sets the whole process in motion. It's a piece of information, a signal that tells your brain, hey, there might be a reward coming up if you do this specific thing.
So it's like a little mental nudge that says, pay attention, something good might be about to happen.
Right. And these cues can be all sorts of things. They can be external, like seeing a notification on your phone, or they can be internal, like feeling a certain emotion.
Okay, so a notification will be an external cue, and something like feeling stressed or bored could be an internal cue.
Exactly. And evolutionarily speaking, we're wired to pay attention to cues that signal basic rewards. Things like food, water, safety, connection with others. These things were essential for our survival.
Right. Makes sense. We're programmed to seek out things that keep us alive and help us thrive.
But of course, our modern world is a bit more complex than that. We've developed all sorts of new rewards that we crave, things like money, status, recognition, approval from others.
So those basic survival instincts are still there, but they've kind of been, I don't know, upgraded to include all these other things that we value in modern society.
Right. And our brains are constantly scanning for cues that predict these rewards, both old and new. It's all happening beneath the surface, often without us even realizing it.
It's like our subconscious is always on the lookout for that next hit of dopamine.
Uh,
So the cue sets the stage, and that brings us to the second step, the craving. What role does craving play in the habit loop?
this is where the motivation kicks in. The craving is the engine that drives the whole process. It's the desire for the change that the reward promises.
So it's not just about wanting the reward itself, it's about wanting the feeling that comes with it, the change in state.
Exactly. Like, you don't crave the cigarette itself, you crave the feeling of relief or relaxation that you associate with smoking.
Or with something like brushing your teeth, it's not about the act of brushing, it's about that fresh, clean feeling you get afterward.
Right. The craving is all about that desired change in your internal state. And what's really important to understand is that cravings are highly personal. What triggers a strong craving in one person might not even register for someone else.
Like how some people get super excited about coffee, while others are perfectly content with tea or just plain water.
Exactly. It's all about individual preferences and experiences. And it's not just about the cue itself, it's about how we interpret it. Our thoughts, feelings, and past experiences all shape our cravings.
So the same cue can lead to completely different cravings in different people. That's fascinating.
It is, right. It highlights the importance of understanding our own unique triggers and what drives our desires.
Okay, so we've got the cue, the trigger, and the craving, the motivation. Now comes the response. What exactly is the response in this habit loop?
The response is the actual habit itself, the action or thought that we engage in. It's what we do in response to the cue and the craving.
So if the cue is seeing a notification and the craving is to know what it says, the response would be picking up our phone and checking it.
Exactly. And whether we actually go through with the response depends on a couple of things. First, how strong is the craving?
Right. How badly do we want that reward?
Exactly. And second, how much effort is involved in the response? If the response requires a lot of energy or willpower, we might not do it, even if we really want the reward.
It's like that classic dilemma of wanting to go to the gym but also wanting to stay on the couch. If the effort feels too great, the couch usually wins.
Exactly. There's always this balance between motivation and friction. And of course, our ability also plays a role. We can only respond in ways that we're actually capable of.
Makes sense. So even if we're super motivated, if the response is beyond our current skill set or physical capabilities, it's not going to happen.
Right. So to recap, the cue triggers the craving fuels the motivation, and the response is the action we take to get that reward.
Which brings us to the final step in the loop, the reward. What's so important about the reward? Why is it the key to making this whole cycle work?
Well, on a basic level, the reward is what satisfies the craving. It's what makes the whole effort worthwhile. But there's more to it than that.
So there's a deeper purpose to the reward.
Absolutely. The reward is also how our brains learn. It's how we figure out which actions are worth repeating.
So it's like a feedback mechanism. We do something, we get a reward, our brain goes, okay, that was good, let's do that again.
Exactly. And the opposite is also true. If we do something and get a negative result, our brain goes, okay, let's not do that again. It's all about learning through trial and error. And this process is happening all the time, mostly without us even realizing it.
Our brains are constantly running these little experiments, figuring out what works and what doesn't. And that brings us back to the cyclical nature of the habit loop, right? It's not just a linear progression from cue to reward. It's a continuous process.
It is, definitely. It's a feedback loop. The reward not only satisfies the craving, but it also reinforces the association between the cue and the response.
So the more times we go through the loop, the stronger that habit becomes. It's like a path in the woods. The more we walk it, the clearer and more defined it becomes.
Exactly. And this whole process can happen incredibly fast, sometimes in just fractions of a second.
So we're not always consciously aware of every step in the loop. It can all happen below the level of our conscious awareness.
Right. And that's why habits can be so powerful, both for good and for bad. They can shape our behavior without us even realizing it.
Okay, so we've got these four distinct steps, but Chapter 3 also provides a really helpful way of grouping those steps into two broader phases, the problem phase and the solution phase. Can you explain those?
Yeah, that's a really useful way of looking at it. The problem phase is basically the cue and the craving. It's the moment when we recognize a need or a desire.
So it's like our brain is saying, hey, something's off, we need to fix this.
Exactly. And then the solution phase is the response and the reward.
Hmm.
It's the action we take to address that problem and the satisfaction we get from it.
So it's like our brain is saying, okay, this is how we fix it. Problem solved.
Right. And that satisfaction, that reward, is what reinforces the whole loop and makes us more likely to repeat those actions in the future.
Okay, so it's problem, solution, problem, solution. This cycle is playing out all the time, shaping
Yeah.
our actions and our lives in ways we don't even realize. And Chapter 3 gives some really relatable examples of this, right? Just to show how this framework plays out in everyday life.
Oh, definitely. Like that classic scenario, your phone buzzes with a notification. That buzz, that's the cue.
Right, the signal that something potentially interesting is waiting for us.
Exactly. And then comes the craving, that
Mm.
urge to know what the notification says, who it's from, what's going on.
Like, did I win the lottery? Did someone like my post? Is it time for dinner?
Right. And then the response is pretty obvious. You pick up your phone and you check it. And the reward, well, that depends on what the notification was.
Maybe it's good news, maybe it's just a random marketing email. But either way, there's a sense of relief, of curiosity satisfied.
Exactly. And that reinforces the whole loop. The next time your phone buzzes, you'll be even more likely to reach for it.
So that's how we end up mindlessly checking our phones 100 times a day. It's all about that habit loop.
Right. And there are so many other examples too. Like you're feeling stressed out while answering emails. That stress is the cue.
Okay, so the feeling itself becomes the trigger.
Exactly. And then comes the craving to escape that stress, to find some relief. And your response might be biting your nails or reaching for a sugary snack, anything that provides a moment of distraction or comfort.
And the reward is that temporary feeling of stress reduction.
Yeah.
But of course, in the long run, those habits aren't really helping us manage stress effectively.
Right. It's a short-term solution with potentially negative long-term consequences.
Another example from the chapter is the morning coffee ritual. Waking up is the cue.
The craving is for alertness, to shake off that grogginess.
The response is brewing that cup of coffee. And the reward is that feeling of being energized and ready to start the day.
It's a classic habit loop, and one that many of us rely on to get going in the morning.
And then there's the example of smelling freshly baked cookies.
Ah, yes. That delicious aroma, that's the cue.
The craving, of course, is for that sweet, sugary treat.
The response is giving in and buying a cookie or two.
And the reward is that moment of pure indulgence, that satisfaction of the sweet tooth.
And of course, there's the procrastination example. You're feeling stuck on a project, that's the cue.
The craving is to escape that feeling of frustration or boredom.
The response is checking social media, browsing the internet, doing anything but the task at hand.
And the reward is that temporary relief from the unpleasant feeling. But again, it's a short-term solution that doesn't address the underlying problem.
Exactly. It's about understanding the patterns, the cues, and cravings that drive those unproductive behaviors.
And finally, there's that super simple example of walking into a dark room. The darkness is the cue.
The craving is to see.
The response is flipping the light switch.
And the reward is that immediate illumination. Simple, but it perfectly illustrates the basic mechanics of the habit loop.
These examples are so helpful because they show how this seemingly complex process is actually playing out all the time in our daily lives. It's not just about big, life-changing habits. It's about all those little things we do without even thinking.
Right. It's about recognizing the patterns in our behavior.
And once we understand those patterns, we can start to change them. And that brings us to the 4 laws of behavior change, which is really the core of how to apply this knowledge in our lives.
Absolutely. These 4 laws are like the practical toolkit for building good habits and breaking bad ones. They give us a framework for understanding what actually works when it comes to behavior change.
So let's walk through them. The first law is all about the cue, and it says,
Make it obvious.
make it obvious, right? If we want to make a habit stick, we need to make the cue as clear and noticeable as possible.
Exactly. The second law focuses on the craving, and it says,
Make it attractive.
make it attractive. We need to find ways to make the habit itself appealing, something we actually want to do.
So it's about framing the habit in a way that makes it desirable, not just something we feel obligated to do.
Exactly. The third law is all about the response, and it says,
Make it easy.
make it easy. If we want to make a habit stick, we need to make it as frictionless as possible. Reduce the effort involved. Remove any barriers to action.
So it's about setting ourselves up for success by making the habit as convenient and easy to perform as possible.
Precisely. And the fourth and final law is all about the reward, and it says,
Make it satisfying.
make it satisfying. The reward needs to be something we genuinely enjoy, something that reinforces the habit and makes us want to repeat it.
So it's not just about completing the habit, it's about making sure it feels good to do so.
Exactly. And the beauty of these four laws is that they can be applied to any habit, big or small.
And they can be used both to build good habits and to break bad ones. To break a bad habit, we simply invert the laws. So instead of making the cue obvious, we make it invisible.
Instead of making the habit attractive, we make it unattractive.
Instead of making it easy, we make it difficult.
And instead of making it satisfying, we make it unsatisfying.
It's like flipping the script on those unwanted behaviors.
Exactly. And Chapter 3 really emphasizes that this framework isn't just some theoretical concept. It's based on decades of research in psychology and behavioral science.
It's a practical approach to understanding and changing our behavior. And it's not just about willpower or self-control. It's about designing our environment and our habits to work for us, not against us.
It's about working with our natural tendencies, not trying to fight them.
So to wrap up, this deep dive into Chapter 3 of Atomic Habits has given us a really solid foundation for understanding how habits work. We've learned about the cue, craving, response, reward loop, the 4 laws of behavior change, and how we can apply these principles in our own lives.
Exactly. And I think the key takeaway here is that understanding this framework gives us a sense of agency. It shows us that we're not just slaves to our habits, we have the power to change them.
And that's incredibly empowering. So as you reflect on all of this, I'd encourage you to think about one of your own habits, something you do regularly, whether it's good or bad. See if you can identify the cue, the craving, the response, and the reward. Really break it down.
Ask yourself those key questions. How can I make it obvious? How can I make it attractive? How can I make it easy? How can I make it satisfying?
And if it's a bad habit, ask the opposite. How can I make it invisible? How can I make it unattractive? How can I make it difficult? How can I make it unsatisfying?
This framework gives us a powerful new lens through which to view our own behavior. It helps us understand the underlying forces that shape our actions, and it empowers us to make intentional changes that align with our goals and values.
Exactly. So with that, I think we've covered a lot of ground today. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive, and we'll be back soon with more insights from the world of personal growth and development.
Until next time.